So, hello everybody. Indeed, my name is Kurt Buehler, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how we can improve the adoption of our Power BI reports. Can everyone see my screen? I think so.
Yeah, it's visible, yeah.
All right. So I'm going to be aided in this by this individual, Clonk the Data Goblin. And if you're not fully aware of who Clonk the Data Goblin is, by the end of the presentation, you will be. Because if there's one thing that Clonk has learned recently, it's that you can use all the best practices, but if no one's using your solution, then it's not a good solution. And this is no fantasy. It's not something that just happens to Clonk. I think it's something that we can all relate to some extent. Because if you just pick out 10 random data projects today, how many do you think will fail? How many do you think will not reach that golden point of adoption? Well, according to recent research done in the last 4 or 5 years, it's as high as 8 and 10, which is really surprising. So this is quite shocking, and this isn't good if we want our report to be adopted. Unsuccessful adoption is a big part of that failure. We want our reports to be adopted, to be used. So this isn't what we want. How can we improve the adoption of our Power BI reports? So in this presentation, I'll focus on 2 points of things that we can do to improve the adoption of our reports. First, I'll discuss the importance of defining and measuring success in a reporting project. This is something that already starts early on in the design phase, but that we have to follow through on during the building and testing of the report and monitor once we set it into production. First, I'll talk about ways that we can measure this and tools that we can use to make this an easy and sustainable process. Second, I'll discuss ways that we can monitor it once our report is released to the business, specifically focusing on the usage metrics and how we can use those in an actionable way for ourselves. In the second part of the talk, I'll discuss how it's very critical for us to maintain continuous collaboration with our user base. Because if we stop user engagement, our usage will see a hit. So it's important then that we maintain this collaboration with the users because the business is continuously evolving and our reports should as well. Not only will this help the users in being able to use our reports, but it will also improve the overall data literacy in our organization and thus the value that the business can take from other data solutions. So to illustrate all of these concepts, I'll use a hypothetical business case rooted in a relatable reality, I think, for a lot of us, focused on sales reporting. So first, a little bit about myself. I am originally from Canada, as you may or may not hear from my accent. And since 2012, I've been living in Belgium. And since 2018, been working at Ordina as a data visualization consultant. I very much love working with and playing around with data. I'm also a big fan of inline skating, and as you can tell, I'm also a very, very big fan of tabletop role-playing games. This last part is a bit relevant for us because, like it or not, we're going to do some role-playing. Specifically, we're going to role-play through a business case. Our business case is that we are fortunate enough to be a part of the pinnacle of adventuring equipment delivery and shipment. We are really at the top of our game. What we do is we ship this equipment worldwide from coast to coast. Things are going super well, but what is our company? We are Dumbledilps Equipment and Adventuring Deliveries Incorporated, better known by our moniker, DEAD. Basically, we sell adventuring supplies and we're very good at it. Some might say a little too good because our data volumes have been increasing exponentially and it's getting a bit hard to run our business in a data-driven way. So we need to have some effective reports that really help us be able to drive some good decisions in our business and optimize all the processes that we're starting to undertake. Recently, a key developer of Power BI reports in our organization, Clonk, has been learning about how to use best practice in order to design reports right. He's also been collaborating with users in design co-creation exercises to ensure that we design the right reports. A combination of these two things together has really made it so that we can level up our design. Klonk and his team have produced a report which we really feel will bring the business value. It's focused on the profit of our company and how it's growing over time. It gives us in 3 seconds an overview of our profit situation. In 30 seconds, lets us dig into some actionable past due insights, which is a really big pain for us at the moment. And in 300 seconds, go deep into the details to be able to answer key questions in specific areas when we need to. However, this is just one design. This is just one report. Our business has a lot of processes where we need data-driven thinking. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And also when it comes to report design, Klonk knows that designing an effective report and launching it into the organization takes more than just a good design. It takes a lot more. So Klonk is fully aware that while they have leveled up, there's still a lot of experience to gain. Nonetheless, our executive feels really, really good about the report that we've designed. She really believes that this will help the organization tackle the problems of the past due payments in order to improve our profit margins overall. But she also has seen a lot of other reporting projects that just didn't land. The reports ended up not being used and are kind of just rotting in a production environment somewhere. So she doesn't want that to happen. She's not a big fan of waste. She says, I want to do this right. So let's start off with a phase 1, a limited region release. Let's just target our largest commercial region and release to the 14 teams there. She explains what she expects. She says, well, this report and the data behind it should be consistent and should be accurate. We need to make sure that the teams use automation and insights from the report to increase their effectiveness. And she elaborates to say, if we can really show that we're successful, I am willing to sponsor a larger analytics initiative, because she does believe in the transformative power of data-driven thinking for our organization. That last part really gets Klonk thinking and really gets his team excited. They have a lot of ideas. There's a lot of exciting technologies coming out. They've attended a lot of wonderful conferences where they've learned a lot of interesting things called DataMinds, and they're ready to execute. But this discussion about success, it's a bit hard, because when she really asks Klonk the golden question, how will we know if we're successful with this report? He kind of fumbles a bit. It's harder than he expects. So they decide to critically assess that, because she really wants to see this in a pragmatic way. So him and his team get together and they focus on this question. How will we know if we're successful? And they realize, under some strong coffee influence, that success for them is all about having a report that's used and a report that can then bring value to those users. But how do they measure that? How can they assess that? Can they already assess it now with their design? And one of Klonk's colleagues stands up. Her name is Bink. And she explains that, well, we're successful if we did 2 things. First, we made a quality report. And second, we set and reached our adoption targets. And that's all fine. Everyone can agree on that. But what is a quality report and how do we measure that? So she gets up and she lists 4 things on the whiteboard and starts explaining. She says, we need to do 4 things. Our report has to have 4 qualities. First, it has to be complete. When a user goes to the report, they have to be able to answer the questions that they went to that report for. If they don't have all the information they need to address that question, they're not going to come back. So we need to make sure that it's complete. Next, we have to make sure that the report and the data behind it is accurate. Our users are going to our reports to use that data to make decisions. They're getting opportunities from the visuals that we're showing them. So if our report isn't to be trusted, then neither are the decisions that they're making and the opportunities they're taking away. This isn't good for them, and it could even harm our organization. So we don't want that. Next, we have to make sure our report is performant. Our users are extremely busy. Our growth has been tremendous over the last months. So they don't have time to sit around and wait for the report to load. That's just a bad user experience, and we need to make sure that we deliver the data on time. Lastly, we have to ensure that our report is accessible. If we deliver something that the users have a difficult time using because of their personal situations or because it's just overly complex, they're going to look at it, and the first thing they're going to think is, how do I get this in Excel? Complete, accurate, performant, and accessible. These are 4 properties that a good report will have. If we fail to do even one of these, then our report will not be a success, and we risk having a failure of adoption of our report because it's unable to cater to what the users need. The next question is, how do we measure that? So what we're going to need is some tools. Specifically, what we're going to need is we're going to need some user-driven insights. I'm going to focus more on the use cases of this, but if you want to know more technical information, I've written a little bit more elaborately in my blog, so you can check it out there. So the first way that they're going to tackle this is they're going to look at completeness and accuracy. So Bing thinks she has a solution to address this in a pretty easy, user-oriented way. For completeness, what they're going to do is do a user story review in order to assess and quantify that. Next, they're going to reuse that same solution to do user acceptance testing in a really easy way, all contained through Teams. This is going to help them quantify processes, automate tasks, and continue user co-creation throughout the building and testing of their report. So when we say the report is complete, what we're really saying is, are all the relevant questions answerable? For this, what we can do is a user story review. This is done by the users, where we take out these user stories, provide them to the users, and give them an opportunity to look at our report, use our report, and then bin those user stories in one of 2 buckets. Either it's possible or it's not possible. We can then quantify this as an assessment of how complete our report is, and also give the users a last opportunity to be able to create new user stories. We can then focus on the not possible ones in order to assess whether we should implement this in our report or help them find an alternative in order to overcome this, in order to solve it. So it's important that the users are the ones who make the verdict on what is or is not possible. Bink illustrates this with an example. She says, well, we have a user story that the user needs to be able to drill down to which products a customer is past due for. We, in our team, really felt like this was possible. When we hover over the accounts, we get an interactive tooltip that shows us the products. So great, we cover that requirement, we cover that user story. But when the user goes through this exercise, he sees that in fact, I don't really feel that's the case, because I need to take this data outside of the report. I need to be able to send it to the customer to really show them what they're past due for. So for me, this isn't so possible. I would be better tailored to a paginated report or something. So it's important then to check our assumptions and to make sure that the user can be able to make these decisions. So how does it work? Well, the user can go in Planner on Teams and then review the story as possible or not possible. From here, a Power Automate flow can shuttle that data into storage, such as a blob storage container or a flat file, and it can then be picked up by a Power BI dataset that can provide us some aggregated insights. This dataset can also be refreshed and embedded in Teams, making this a self-contained experience where the user can enter the data and then also see the results, all in the span of a few seconds in the same place. So this is what it looks like in real life. The user takes the user stories and has finished reviewing them. He's marked a few as not possible, but most as possible. This will trigger a flow, which can also be run automatically, that will shuttle that data into an Azure Blob storage container. Once the data is there, it will also trigger the refresh of a Power BI dataset, which will pick that up and display it with a number of aggregations to show us how our project is progressing so far. We can see how things have gone and how they've progressed, but when the user refreshes the tab, he'll see that the report is in fact up to date and all the user stories have been reviewed. He's marked 3 as not possible, and we can also then search in this report in order to look at a specific user story and see how it's evolved during our project development to help us drive that discussion if we need to figure out what to do about it. So the user marked 3 things as not possible. A couple of them are new, one of them is not. A comparison to quarterly forecast, a new kind of aggregation, rolling 12 months, and a view on profit per unit sold. Clonk and Bink decide that they want to poll the broader user community to reach out to the different teams and see if this reflects their needs or if this is something specific to the individuals who did the user review. What they saw was that for the profit per unit, that most of the teams agreed that in fact this is something that they do today or something that they think would be valuable. So this was clearly something that they missed during the design that they need to implement in the report. For the rolling 12-month aggregation, however, only 4 teams said that they did this. It's reflective of something specific to how they run their business, and they're used to doing that in Excel today. So Clonk and Bing thought it would be a good opportunity to introduce them to analyze in Excel. They can reuse the dataset, keep doing what they need to do, and preserve that single version of the truth. For the quarterly forecast, it turns out that there's only one team that has a consistent and complete quarterly forecast. They're already quite data-driven, so Clonk and Bing think that it would be good to show them how to connect to this in Power BI and then also connect to their forecast and mash this up in a composite model. That way, they can continue to do their own self-service analytics to get team-specific insights, still reusing our dataset. So it's important that we find solutions for what users feel are not possible, because otherwise, if we set this into production, these are all going to be surprises that come out of the woodwork that make it for reasons why the users are not using our report. So Clonk and Bing, they go through this exercise, and the result is that they had more user involvement and had found and filled some gaps in their design. They also reused this solution for user acceptance testing, which helped them go through a really simple process to identify quality issues with their data. However, completeness and accuracy of data can always be a threat. So we got to be able to assess this, because if we add new things or make changes or adjustments or even over increasing data volumes, it can cause a cascading stream of effects, which can result in regression. In the worst case scenario, it could result in a full breakdown of our report or the data model behind it. This is not something that we want, so Bing proposes a solution. We're going to set up some automated regression monitoring. This is a nice way to easily monitor the data quality and completeness, and it's very simple for us to set up. The use cases here are that we can have automated detection of changes in historical data, which normally should remain stable over time. And we can also have automated validation of fixed truth business data, data from the business that we don't expect to change. For example, how many product types do we have? How many customer groups are there? How many commercial regions are there that we sell X product in? These things we wouldn't expect to change, and we can use to test certain assumptions and ensure that there's no regression. These can then be linked to downstream data alerts, which can trigger actions to, for example, notify us that a regression happened, but more importantly, take automated steps to ensure that users do not see or interact with the wrong data. So how does it work? Well, once we finished validating our data model, we have a data set which we are confident is accurate and complete. At that point, we set it into production, but we save a version of it that reflects that point in time. One data set is going to be our production model, which is refreshed every day and will serve users the data that they see in their reports. The second data set is a point in time when we were confident that the quality and completeness was up to snuff, and that is our historical model. Now, using the new feature of direct query over Power BI datasets and Azure Analysis Services, we can connect to both the production model as well as the historical model and create a hybrid. This hybrid model, we can then compare the historical data inside, and normally, if there's been no regression, it shouldn't have changed. On top of this, we can connect to a flat file that's maintained by the business that maintains some baselines that also shouldn't change. We combine all of this into a single regression report to automatically detect if a regression has happened. We expose this to the users because we want to be transparent, to give them confidence in the fact that our data is stable and that it's accurate. More importantly, we set up some data alerts so that if a regression happens, we are notified so that we can immediately take action and not wait to surprise hear it from a user. What's particularly interesting here is that we can use these data alerts to trigger actions with Power Automate. For example, notify us in a team or notify a user community in a team, or more importantly, do something functional. For example, to go through Azure Functions in order to trigger a PowerShell script, which with the Power BI REST API will block the deployment of our refresh dataset from the test workspace to the production workspace, thus in a fully automated way, preventing the users from seeing or interacting with that incorrect data where we've detected the regression. This is what it looks like in real life, where we have in blue our historical model and in red our production model. We link up the dimensions so that they can be speaking the same language, and we set up some measures to mathematically compare them, just subtracting the measures that already exist. We can then put this together in a report where we expect the baseline situation, the good situation, to be that everything is 0. There's no regression. But it might be that one day we refresh that data set and we see that this is not the case. For example, in this instance, there was an issue with the master data join for the products, and we actually lost some transactional data. So our historical sales on today was actually lower than it was yesterday. We detect this automatically, it informs us and triggers some downstream actions, but we can also use this report to do a root cause analysis because we can immediately see where the regression happened. So it serves then 3 benefits. First, we're automatically notified. Second, we can have automatic actions taken. And third, we can have a simple, straightforward root cause analysis in order to see where the regression occurred. So Clonk and Bing set this up in order to measure and monitor the completeness and accuracy. The result is that they feel more confident in the completeness and accuracy of their report and the quality of their solution. So they're going to measure the data completeness with the user story review, the accuracy with this automated regression monitor, and next they want to look at performance. So when Bing highlights this on the whiteboard, Clonk says, I do this all the time, performance analyzer. She says, yeah, okay, but in the next phases, data volumes are going to get super big. Right now, we're releasing in one region, so there's a limited amount of data. But we want this to be a global solution, Clonk. So if we are going to expand this over millions and millions of rows, we have to make sure that our DAX, that our model, can handle it. So there's many ways to measure performance, but she asked Clonk to show him how he does it. And Clonk goes in and he shows her, he says he refreshes the visuals, and he says, oh yeah, see, so this visual, this gross profit is a bit slow. And he talks about what he's going to do about it, but she says, but I thought you would export it in order to derive a report on the JSON file or something, like parse it and make some nice visuals. And Clonk's not so technical, so he says, JSON. The only JSON I know is the one in accounting. He says, no. I just, I made some changes in the DAX. I added a calculate statement somewhere. And so then I refreshed it. And see, it's 15% faster. She says, oh, Clonk, innocent Clonk. She pats him on the back. She says, all right, we're going to have to measure the performance and we're going to have to set up some protocols. So they're going to look at the DAX query evaluation time, but they could also be looking at the report visual and page render time. But they decide to focus on the DAX queries using DAX Studio. So Bing takes out her DAX Studio on her computer and she busts it out and connects it to the model. She shows Clonk and she says, all right, we're going to do something called benchmarking. We're not just going to test it once, we're going to test it 20 times, both on a cold cache and a warm cache, but separately. And he says, but I already tested it once. Why do we have to do it 20 times? She says, you'll see, hold on. She clicks the button. So as it runs, as a result, they get these results, which they can then take out and analyze. To illustrate the point, she visualizes them. She says, see, the first time you did see this 15% difference, but that was just one time. If we ran it 20 times, all in a cold cache, we see that it's just a difference of 2%. And in fact, it's completely statistically insignificant when we compare the mean or median. And Clonk nods as he says, oh, I didn't know. And she says, yeah, I mean, it's just that one time was random chance, or you were comparing the cold cache to the warm cache. So if you're going to test the performance, you really have to do it when you aggregate it multiple times, have a sample size, because here there's no meaningful difference. We need to remember that neglecting variance, not only in our reports for users, but also in our own analyses, can lead to wrong conclusions. So the result of this is that Bing and Clonk set up some robust test practices to ensure the performance of their reports are going to be up to quality standards, and that when they get those increased data volumes, that they'll be able to have a design that can handle it. So they measure performance with the query benchmarking. But how are we going to look at accessibility? And for this, Bink explains that they can measure something called time to learn, which, as you might have guessed, is measuring how long it takes a user to learn to use the report. We would give the user a task like, for example, switch to unit shipped. They have a list of different tasks to accomplish. We can then measure the time it takes for the user to complete that task over a number of trials. We test this over multiple users, and then we look and analyze the results. We would expect there to be a difference between an accessible and an inaccessible design. For an accessible design, we do see that over time, the user becomes quicker and quicker as they learn the report. At a certain moment, they master the use of the report. For an inaccessible design, this is also the case, but because they have a hard time using it for various reasons, it takes them longer. So we have an objective metric to be able to compare different designs to say, well, in this one, it took 5 trials to reach mastery, but in this one, it took 10. So it gives us a way to be able to quantify it. This is another point where we can use DAX Studio because we can do something called query tracing. She again takes open DAX Studio and she connects through to their workspace and she pulls up the data model and starts running the query tracing. So once the query trace begins, she sees this on her screen and she tells Clonk, all right, go in the report and I want you to click on unit shipped. So Clonk loads up the report, the page renders, and he navigates to the slicer and selects the unit shipped. As he does so, he sees that all the DAX queries that result when he interacted with the report are visible on the DAX Studio on Bink's laptop. So she shows him, see, this is everything that resulted due to your interaction. Here is where we can measure that time to learn because the report rendered for you at this point, and we know it took 9 seconds for you to find and execute on this action. So it took 9 seconds. So we can just keep this running, and we also can measure how long the queries take. So the result is that they had a process to measure report accessibility, which let them be able to validate their designs. So for completeness, they're using user story review to assess that. For accuracy, an auto regression monitor to make sure that there's no change in the historical data that's unexpected. Performance using query benchmarking, and accessibility by testing time to learn. All of these, as a result, are giving them metrics in order to assess the quality of the report. They feel confident that their report that they made is better because they did this, and they can also show this to, for example, the executive to build her confidence that the solution will work. So we've measured the quality of our report. Next, we have to set and reach adoption targets, Bink explains. How we have to do this is we have to look at the usage. So we need to do some monitoring. We can monitor if it's used and how much it's used, but we can also look at how it's used with the Power BI audit logs. In this presentation, I'm just looking at the usage metrics for the interest of time, but this is still an interesting place to get a lot of insights. And Clonk and Bink, they decide that they're going to look at one of the reports that's already in production today to see what they can take away from it. So they go to one of the biggest sales data sets, a report that's used daily to look at sales information. It's had a lot of issues in the last few months. It's not, ideal, but they decide to take a look at the usage metrics and see, how can we set some adoption targets? How can we see if this is being adopted, if it's getting better or worse? And they open up the default user metrics report from Power BI, the new one. And they take a look at the data and it's take a while. So they just glance over the bars. It's being used. I mean, there's numbers. So they look over. They do see, however, that the report open trend seems negative 17%. They don't see that immediately in the data, however, so they decide to connect to their usage model and do some ad hoc analytics themselves. When they do this and kind of try to break it down and understand where that's coming from, they see that Power BI is comparing the first half of the period to the second half of the period, but the rise of usage at the end of the month and the drop at the start of the month, they actually expect that because that's how the business works. So it's not a very good way for them to assess the usage. They decide to instead make their own measure. They compare the month over month usage from March 14th to February 14th. And here they see that there's almost no change. But they do notice something strange. They look in the usage metrics and they see that there's a lot of IT people there. There's a lot of support people there. And they remember that this report has had a lot of problems. So they wonder what it would look like if they just filter to the users. When they do that, the situation is a lot different. There's a drop of 37% in usage compared to last month, a really big difference, suggesting that there is in fact a usage problem that seems to be happening. So what they take away from this is not only that they have to adapt the metrics, but they also need to focus on the users, not the extras. They need to make sure that when they're monitoring the user metrics, that they just focus on who the users are defined to be. Next, they want to make sure that they set helpful usage targets. And they understand from that exercise that they want to focus on the users. But the next question is, how can they do that? And they decide to make their own metric called monthly user saturation. What they do here is that they look at the number of users that are using the report in a month period, so a rolling 4-month sum, and they compare this to the total number of users who should be using it. And they express this as a percentage. They decide that 90% is what they're going to target, and this is going to be their main adoption target. When they derive this on the report that they were looking at, they see that the user saturation is only 73% and it's dropping. So it seems like this is going to be more helpful than if they just look at a comparison of the views, for example. So the result of this exercise is that they've created a personalized and relevant report on the usage metrics that will help them to be able to address their adoption questions and targets in a more specific way. They've segmented the users in order to really focus on the people who they want to use the report, and they've defined a metric and a target for their adoption. They are ready. We are ready. It's time for the regional release. So it's Klonk's first go live, him and Bink. Bink's been, through this a little bit before, but they go and try to set everything into production. They create the app, and they create some trainings and some announcement material, and they're ready to go. So how does it go? In the first few months, it goes really well, actually. So there's limited data disruption because they have an automated monitoring solution. And in fact, at no point does the business see or interact with incorrect data. They open with strong usage and have consistent performance. They're able to see that they're consistently above their 90% user saturation metric. On top of that, they even do an analysis after a few months to look at the past due payments, and they see that in the region where they launched, that the past due payments are declining faster than in the other regions, which is suggestive that the report is helping the business. So they feel really happy about that, but our executive, she feels thrilled. So she is more than ready to pull the trigger on the next analytics steps. Klonk and Bink waste no time going to work. They set up some roadmap meetings and some discussions. They have all kinds of things ready. There's a lot they want to do. But at a certain moment, they catch wind of something else. They start to hear some bad things. They hear that the report that they had launched a few months ago, it was all super good. Doesn't seem to be the case right now. They're hearing that the users seem a bit frustrated and there's rising export. They even notice a few times that there's some alternate truth reporting, that people are actually taking data and combining it with unofficial sources that are provided through email or legacy systems. So what's going on? Things are going so well. What they are observing is a growing divide between those who are using the data and those who are designing the data. And what the question is that they're posing now is why? Why is this happening? We did everything right. We interacted with the users. We set up all these things. We did design co-creation, user story review. We tested and measured. We have transparent monitoring. So why is this happening? And after some hard discussions and some self-actualization, they realize that adoption is a user-maker relationship, and relationships take work. It doesn't stop after go live, because if we stop that collaboration, it will take a hit on our usage. They have a revelation that continuous adoption means continuous collaboration, and that they, in fact, the moment they got that green light to focus on other things, that's exactly what they did. And there was no more support or discussion about this report. They just let it go on its own. So they decide, all right, we got to fix this. So they set up some user maker touch points, some simple things, but they really believe that communication is the foundation for adoption. What they do is they set in some weekly drop-in workshops where the community can come and express their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas about the report. They also set up some Teams groups to kind of centralize that feedback and create a space where people can drop off files and things so that there's no emails flying around. On top of that, they set up some fun activities and discussion to keep it light in those workshops or in that Teams group to break down barriers and to make people more comfortable with expressing their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas, so that they're able to ask questions freely without fear of being judged. So once they created that open information space, what did they learn? They learned that some things had happened, some small things that had a big impact on the usage. First, the business kept going, but the report stayed the same. The past due payments started to get more and more under control, and the business started to focus more on opportunities. But the report was still focused on those pains, and it wasn't really in line with what the business wanted to do. On top of that, because they were changing that focus, they had some new master data. They created a new segmentation of their products, but that wasn't available in the report. It was something that would have been really simple to add, but just because there was no communication happening and no collaboration, it wasn't there. So people stopped looking at the reports for that aspect, for those questions. Third, because the company is growing so fast and so much, we're hiring a lot of new people. These new people don't know the context of our reports, and there's no onboarding process to help them learn or understand the Power BI things. So all they were doing were just exporting to Excel because they have a new job and they need to keep going. So the result of this is that Clonk and Bing decided, okay, we have to coordinate and collaborate. We need to work with the users in order to close these little gaps that are starting to have quite a big effect. For the first two things, it was a question of just adding a little bit of extra information and making some small changes to the reports. The business and their needs had slightly changed, but the report wasn't supporting them. But because they were able to have an open discussion and learn this, they were able to easily do it and support them. Next, for the new employees, they just set up some open office hours where they could come by and freely ask questions, but also worked with HR to set up a simple onboarding process so that they could learn what reports there are, what they should be using for what purpose, and why. All of this resulted in an improvement of the report and the value that the users got from it. But more importantly, it elevated the data literacy levels in the organization by creating a more open dialogue and data-driven culture, increasing the value that the business not only took from our report, but also from other data solutions that existed in our organization. So to summarize, the road to adoption, it seems like a linear path where we design our solution, we then build it, we test it, and we set it out into production. The reality is that it's a perilous adventure with a lot of winding twists and turns. That's why we have to be able to measure the quality of our report to say that it's complete, accurate, performant, and accessible. We also have to monitor the use and set adoption targets that reflect the report and the situation that we're in. Finally, we have to ensure that we continuously collaborate with the user base because adoption is something that doesn't just end when we set our solution into production. It's something that persists. And an added benefit of that is that we will raise the overall data literacy level and openness of the relationships between us and the users. So all of these things are little steps that we can take to take the right foot forward in helping the adoption of our report. Because if we want to go from Excel hell to Insight Island, there's a lot in between. And these are little tools that can help us survive that perilous adventure. So thank you for your attention. Thank the organizers for putting up this event. It's really nice to be able to participate and to speak, and the talks have been super interesting. Also thanks to my mentor, Joris, who's taught me everything I know about data and visualization and stuff. And of course, the artists who I collaborate with to create these lovely illustrations. So, and you for your attention. So, thanks.